Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to this episode of Menopause Coaching Conversations. Well, it's actually Menopause Conversations rather than the coaching, because in fact, I'm actually in the great company of another NLP coach, which is brilliant. Please welcome my special guest today, Lucy Buxton. Hi, Lucy. How are you?
I'm really good. Yourself?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. We've just had a little chat about everything that's going on in our lives. So let's get into this episode, which is fabulous. Today, we're going to look at a condition that actually is very, very under-researched, but is actually growing in prevalence, and that is PMDD. Lucy, tell us, what is PMDD?
Pre-Menstrual Dysphoric Disorder.
And so we're going to talk about premenstrual dysphoric disorder and actually how this relates to all women. So if you are a mum, a dad, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent watching this, and you've got teenagers, this is for you, okay? And it's also for those women that maybe are on the cusp of perimenopause or going through the menopause, or even as a grandparent, this might join the dots for you as to what's been happening generationally to the women in your lives. So Lucy has very, very generously agreed to talk about her own personal situation with her own daughter about PMDD. So tell us, Lucy, what's been going on in your world?
Gosh, so we'll go back to 2018, and something wasn't right with my daughter. It was in the April, and she'd have been 14 in June, and she'd had a couple of panic attacks. Didn't think anything much more than teenager stuff. My mum at the time was very poorly. And we'd already been told mum would die, but she kind of pulled through. And then we knew that obviously things wouldn't last very well with my mum for much longer. And then all of a sudden, my daughter took an overdose.
Wow.
I didn't have a clue. I knew nothing. I absolutely knew nothing. I'd picked her up, she'd come home, she'd done all her jobs, washed up, had a tea. And then it was about 7:20. I went up to her bedroom and I thought there's something odd, and there she was. There was a load of empty packets of paracetamol on the floor, and she sat there, she'd taken an overdose. Obviously I'm a nurse, so my nurse brain kicked in, and I immediately called for an ambulance. And from that moment on, my world turned upside down. I had no clue that she was ill. She'd hidden everything. She was going to school. She was performing, she was getting all her grades, she was top of the top sets. There was no concerns anywhere whatsoever, and I did not know. In A&E, they did an ECG, so they had to take a jacket and a tights off her, and at that point in time I discovered that she'd been self-harming, and I didn't. Nothing did I know. So from there, she had that treatment. We had no mental health support. She went on a waiting list. And I started to think there was something odd. I couldn't understand why. I didn't know why. And I started to notice that there was a pattern in how she was. And it was almost like she was two different people. And she'd be okay for a couple of weeks. Then all of a sudden, she'd morph into somebody else. She'd struggled with her periods, but I had, as a mum, thought, oh, well, she's just like me, because I've always struggled with my periods. I started them at the age of 10, she was 11. We've both always struggled, really heavy, really painful. I didn't really have anything I could reflect on further, because one, my mum couldn't talk, my mum had passed away a few months later after this, but my mum wasn't in a place where she could explain. But my mum had an hysterectomy in her 30s. Okay. So I'd not had a mum to be able to have the conversations with about hormones, and I'd not had anything I could kind of measure or reflect against. So I kept watching my daughter and thinking there's something not right. We've got no help. Anyway, my mum got worse and my daughter took a second overdose, and we still had no help. And it was at this point I thought, right, this isn't on. And I started to look at the pattern. So I'd check back the date, I'd worked out, and both overdoses were just before her period was due. And I mentioned it to a friend who put me in touch with a lady who's written a book, books by Caroline Church, and the book is called I Blame the Hormones. And she started to explain to me about a condition called Pmdd. At this point, after my daughter's second overdose, we finally got some mental health intervention. My mum died 2 days later. And then it was 2 days after my mum's funeral, my daughter admitted she got another plan to end her own life. And with that, I said, I can't do this. Popped her into hospital. And she was in hospital for 16 months. And in hospital, they went very much down the line of this is anxiety and depression, but I knew it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I went down the line of period trackers, but I couldn't get the hospital to fill them out. I paid privately for her to see a consultant who completely agreed with me. And she wanted to put her on a treatment called Prostrap, which would have put my daughter into an artificial menopause, and I agreed with this. It just so happened we couldn't be able to administer it, you know. Politics and red tape. I couldn't get them to fill out period trackers. And I knew that every point where she would ovulate in a cycle, I would track her against my own tracker. I would know that she would have incidents in that 2 weeks. Having Pmdd massively raises somebody's risk of suicide, suicidal thoughts, suicidal idealization. Because when you're in that 2-week phase, you just feel like you are somebody completely different, and everything that you've experienced is so much heightened. So anything to do with her senses, her sense of hearing, noise, she cannot tolerate noise at all. A sense of being around other people, the anxiety, ultimately her body cannot cope with the changes in the hormone level for her. And I had to watch at a distance for 16 months with nobody listening, and people saying, oh, she's got emerging emotionally unstable personality disorder, or she's potentially bipolar. All of these conditions that we know women have been labelled with and been diagnosed with over the years, and I still was not having it. She came home December 2019, and I was very vocal. I put in writing about my thoughts about hormones. I was very, very clear, because in my head, this is what it was. I was able to get photographs and track them right back to the age of 11, and I can look at the photographs and I can see when she changed, and I can see how withdrawn she looked and how pale. And anyway, we ticked along, and it took quite a bit to get my daughter to understand and accept. And she was on antidepressants and other drugs. We had to put her onto the right antidepressants for her, because obviously some antidepressants have a better uptake and a better response around your happy hormones than others. So, you know, she was on a big dose of antidepressants. We got her home, and I think being home and being settled helped. But then we got to the point where it's only not quite 12 months ago, her period was due, and for the first time in probably a good 9 or 8 months, she self-harmed, and she completely had dissociated. She wasn't there, she wasn't present, whatever. So I just, you know, got on, taped her up, got on, healed her, and then I was like, do you understand now what this is? And she said, yes. So we spoke to our GP. GP was brilliant, got in touch with the local gynae department. The GP heard exactly what I said, in the fact that I watch her become a different person. And we found a pill, and we put her on the pill. She took it for 21 days. And then again, we saw the same thing happen. As soon as her period was due to come, as soon as she stopped the pill, she changed it again. And within 48 hours, we said, forget this. And she went back on the pill. She's stayed on it since, and she is completely and utterly different.
That is just the most amazing account, isn't it, of Because we could be labelled, can't we, as overbearing mothers and you know, barking up, neurotic, and all of these sorts of things, and all the labels that we're used to getting thrown at us. But the reality is, you knew, you were watching, you were vigilant, you were observant. I mean, my goodness, that's the first time I've heard your story in that detail, and it's phenomenal. I mean, credit to you for, I mean, just keeping going relentlessly. I mean, that is just amazing. And so, can we just fill in the gaps for people in terms of what we're talking about here? I mean, PMDD is specifically relating to those last 2 weeks before you get your period. And that is the portion of your menstrual cycle which is under the influence of progesterone, isn't it? So when we look at estrogen and progesterone, and we know testosterone is in the background too, and that's 3 times, you know, more dominant at that stage, but what is going on? Which hormone is the one that's the problem, would you say, in PMDD? Do we know that?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know. And for me, do we actually know enough? I don't know. Maybe I should do more research. I think for me as a mum, it was about, I know that this is what the problem is. I know when she's ovulating, because I can tell, and she can feel herself ovulate. I can too. And I can sense my mood drops. It really just drops at the point of ovulation. So from a chemical level, I don't have that insight, but I have the experience level of a mum who had to allow her daughter to be sectioned.
I mean, yeah, because just to protect her life. And we talked a bit offline before, and there are a number of people talking about this. Duffy Squips on Instagram, also mum and daughter, who are talking about it. And you know, the reality is, it's only when you then see yourself almost through the lens of your child that you're like, hang on a minute. And a small amount that I've read up about it is saying that actually it's that when we ovulate, there's an initial drop of estrogen, and that is the signal for progesterone. So what's going on in a woman's body when we're ovulating? You know, the egg is being released from the ovary, it makes its way down the fallopian tube. If it meets sperm and gets fertilized, then it embeds in the lining of the womb. Now, in order for that to happen, we need that progesterone to plump up that lovely lining, make it very hospitable, and that maintains the pregnancy if the fertilized egg embeds. If there's no fertilized egg, that comes away around day 20, anything from 25 onwards. And that's usually when people who are living with PMDD feel relief, isn't it? It's like,
it's like light and day. It's like living with 2 different people, and she felt like 2 different people completely. And it would be the point where it was things like the noise, vision, sensitivity to light, pain that she would have. So everything to her was heightened. She also believes that that she may be autistic. Okay. So for those people that have got PMDD and who struggle with a sensory processing condition, the 2 then can even become even more heightened. And so for her, because she felt so dreadful, because of how she was as a person, she was really village and hardworking. She'd internalized it and formed really like unhealthy, in my opinion, coping strategies. You know, I understand why people self-harm. I understand why people do it, and you know, the science behind it. But for her, she couldn't talk about her problems, and it took her quite a while to realize that actually it's my hormones, and I don't get on with them.
Exactly. And may I ask about your own personal situation? I mean, how do you relate to what your daughter's gone through? I mean, when you look back, I mean, when you look over your own cycle, because here's the thing, this doesn't just happen to teenagers. You know, we have our hormones for life. So people are starting to realize now in perimenopause, and before and after, actually, I've got PMDD.
Yeah, so I would suggest I have had periods of severe PMS.
Yeah.
Would I say I have PMDD? No. However, I've had postnatal depression twice.
Right.
So there clearly is something hormonal, a link between me and my daughter. I don't know. Like I said about my mum struggled with depression for as long as I can remember. And she never got anywhere with her thoughts around the menopause, and that's what it was. Because I guess in the 80s and in the 90s, you know, people didn't really want to know. And also, you know, when she got to that point of being kind of 65 or whatever, and she was still struggling, they were saying, oh, no. My mum ended up with osteoporosis. So, you know, when you can step back and look at it, you can see the connections. And as for myself personally, yeah, I know when I'm ovulating, and I don't even need to look at my tracker. Yes, I can feel it, but I feel so desperately sad, and it is a desperate sadness. And I long for my period to come those first few days, and I think, oh, I feel human again. But I think because possibly how society is or has been, and the narrative and what we hear, I'd grown up sucking it up, putting up with it. And I've learned to know what works for me, what doesn't work for me. So years.
And you know, it's I mean, we were talking before about histamine intolerance, which we're going to do a video on that, because honestly, it's like one of those spider diagrams. You know, you just think you get this sorted and it's like another branch is going off over there. But we know that things like histamine intolerance, which drive estrogen in those first 2 weeks, and that causes an estrogen dominance. I mean, I personally, I mean, when I hear your story and the more I've read into it, I think, do you know what? I'm pretty sure I spent all of my teenage years with severe premenstrual tension, PMS, Pmdd, quite possibly, and I can really resonate with everything you've said. Very heavy periods, you know, genetically in our family. My sister's had endometriosis. I'm doing a video about my sister who's had to have a surgical menopause, which didn't get any counselling. You know, my younger sister. You know, we need to be better, don't we? I mean, what do we need to change, Lucy, in your opinion? I mean, you've already touched on some elements, but you know, thank goodness your daughter's okay. But thankfully you were there championing her. So what do you think needs to change?
Oh, lots of stuff. So I think it's about taking into context familial history. So for me, I've had endometriosis.
Okay.
They tried to, you know, treat me with progesterone, and I was just like a crazy, not happening. I was on it for a matter of days, and I had to come off it because I didn't. I did. You know, the fact that I've had postnatal depression. I don't get on being pregnant. Doesn't suit me at all.
No.
Which is strange actually, because when you're pregnant and you've got PMDD, that's probably one of the best times, you know, and that women talk about. I think for me, it's about how the medical profession need to see the person as a whole person.
Yeah.
Do not just look at the womb in isolation, and do not look at the brain in isolation, because the two go hand in hand. And I also think it's the message that we give around female subjects. Hang on a minute, we've all got mums. We've all got mums, you know, that's quite frightening, isn't it? We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for hormones. So why do we not talk about this stuff? Why is this stuff swept under the carpet? We've got past the point of people applying stigma to women because she's got her period. You know, I've got my period. Don't label me with a mean because I've got my period. Don't say I'm crazy because I've got my period. You know, the words and the language that we've used, and I think women need to champion women. We need to support women, and we also need to challenge the medical model, educate ourselves. Had I not have educated myself, I wouldn't have been able to get my daughter to where she is. And through our journey, we've supported another mum and daughter who went through similar, again, tried to take their own lives, ended up being sectioned. They themselves have had to go through having injections to put them into the early menopause, and then the appropriate hormonal treatments, and then just the education around it. And it is about pushing back and knowing that, you know, you just got to knock on quite a few doors, and to know that GPs are general practitioners, and the focus being on general. So if you feel and you know your own body, trust in that, and actually don't just be fobbed off at the first conversation. And also don't have the believe what they say about you're too young for this, you're too young for that.
Yes.
I've got a friend, she was in her 30s when she went through menopause, in her 30s. And she's got an implant that she has, you know, changed and whatever every however many weeks. And then I look at myself now, and I know I'm so perimenopausal. And it's about, what do I need to do for my body? What can I do better? So that's about me looking at my exercise, looking at the type of exercise that I do, looking at what I need to do for my mental health, my mental well-being. What do I need to do about ensuring that I track my symptoms, my period, knowing where I'm at, and being aware of those changes in your body. So yeah, keep up with your smears, know what's going on with your own body, and educate yourselves, because, you know, education and knowledge is power.
It's so true. It's so true. And I really resonate everything you've said there. I mean, you know, we get very focused on ourselves, don't we? And we sort of think it's only just happening to us. And that's why I'm doing this series, to let people know it's happening to so many people in so many aspects of women's health. Personally, I don't think a focus on menopause goes far enough. I think we need to look, and they're now talking about, aren't they, women's life cycle. The NHS has put together a strategy which is going to be, you know, in place, which looks from us from birth as women and tracks us right the way through to old age, because our hormones and our needs are different. There's a great infographic actually, and it shows right from birth to our death, basically, how our hormone requirements change, what we need, what assistance, what resources. And mental health tracks the entire period of our lifetime. If we get it right with the hormones, we have positive wellness and well-being. And that is a really big part of being well, isn't it? It's not just the physical element, but it's what happens here also. So you're absolutely right. I think it's just travesty. I think it is a scandal. I interviewed Kate Muir last week. I think it is a scandal that, as working people ourselves, we have to fight for this. We have to stand on our soapbox and scream about it like a fishwife, because it seems that's the only way to get noticed. So what's your hope? I mean, if you were to, I asked Kate Muir, you know, if you put in a time capsule, what would you put in a time capsule about now? What would you hope would be the outcome when it comes to premenstrual dysphoric disorder?
The outcome, my hope is that actually medical professionals actually put it in one of their conditions as, is it this? Certainly from a mental health perspective, the mental health professionals need to stretch their thinking and knowledge, because so many young women, so many women end up in mental health institutions or facilities, and being in one of those creates so many more problems, where actually we need to look at the fact that it is a physical thing that impacts our mental health, and for the fact that then these women do not need to be labelled, because these labels are powerful in a wrong way, in a negative way. To be told a narrative that is incorrect it's no good, and all it does is it fuels the the keeping the female, the woman, where she is. And I genuinely believe that it should be something that all doctors should be aware of. You know, menopause, perimenopause.
Absolutely. And that's why I think women's health in business needs to be a overarching policy, you know, because actually how many women are going through an early menopause that don't even know it? How many are going through fertility issues? How many are already working in organizations and have PMDD, and the prospect of having a tricky perimenopause? You know, we need to do better. And I said this to someone today, when you think that 77% of the NHS
is female. Look at my daughter. So she got a job not long before Christmas, and you know, bless her, she didn't take a GCSE, she wasn't able to and stuff. So for her to get a job was just incredible. But for her employer to understand, they knew she'd been ill, but we hadn't really elaborated. But we ended up having to elaborate, because one day she just couldn't. She just got overwhelmed. She's got PTSD from her experience in hospital. So she had flashbacks, you know, the fire alarm went off. We were then able to say that this is what the problem was. And this is virtually a full female team she works with, and they didn't know about it. And they've got daughters, and they've got sisters, and they've got granddaughters. And as soon as we were able to explain, this is what it is, this is what's going on, as an employer, they then went above and beyond to make changes to support my daughter. So she now goes to work, she has her music on her phone, she's got her earphones in, and they know that her hearing is massively affected. So that's what we need to do. We need to be able to have conversations to educate people, so that we don't end up putting people in boxes where they're just labelled. And
I love
that's
that.
just not acceptable.
I love that, because we can't talk about diversity, you know, equality and inclusion and not make some reference to this. If we can make reasonable adjustments because we understand, because we have that knowledge, you're absolutely right. It drives down stigma, which is so important, and drives up that inclusion, that participation, because, you know, we all have something to offer. And actually, you know, we wouldn't shame a diabetic, would we?
No. And for my daughter, her antidepressants and the pill that she takes for her is like taking insulin.
Yeah.
So, and what's really sad is that, you know, she's going to have to pay for this at some point. And it shouldn't be, because if she was a diabetic, she wouldn't have to pay. But unless she takes this medication, the more she risks going back to that place where potentially she will take her own life and succeed. Luckily, you know, she's done her mindset work. You know, she's worked on the neurology, she's rewired, she's got far better strategies now. She's in a better place, she's in a fabulous place. And she realizes that she can take tablets. She manages it all perfectly well on her own, and she knows that life is for living.
What a brilliant place to finish our conversation today. You know, I've written down, you know, the three things: familial history. Let's look further than just the person in front of us, but let's look at the whole person in front of us. You know, the medical profession, that was the second thing you said. They need to look at the head, you know, the heart, the spirit, the mind, you know, take the whole person in. And thirdly, those conversations, so important, because knowledge is power for both parties. It means we can get the best out of people, and we can do the best for people. So before we finish, do you have any resources or places that you think would be helpful to direct people, or what would your advice be?
I would definitely
say,
if you've got questions over your own periods or hormones or moods, get a period tracker. There are loads. You just put them on your phone. My one's the one that came with my gadget that I wear on my arm, and I count my steps with.
Okay, that's great.
So many. You can get period trackers from the NHS website as well.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is educate yourself. And I personally would buy the book I Blame the Hormones by Caroline Church.
Yeah,
it's a really easy read. and it's split into 2 parts. So it's her journey as a person. It's a very raw and honest account of the crazy behaviors that she had, that she needed because what she was feeling. And then the back is sectioned into educational information about conditions. And it explains, you know, different treatment options, you know, your hormonal cycle. And then there's links to lots of researches. It's a really easy read.
I've written that down and I will put that in the notes to follow this video. So lastly, Lucy, you've been absolutely brilliant and so generous with your time. Thank you very much.
Right.
Tell us, how can people get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. So that's Lucy Buxton. There's a lovely smiley picture of me wearing a red jumper. And I work with a lot of people who work in social care. So a lot of kind of social care platforms you might find me in. And you can also get in touch with me directly through my website, which is www.ljbcoachconsultancy.co.uk.
Oh, that is brilliant. I know people will definitely be in touch with you. So from me to you, thank you so much. We're going to do a part 2 though, aren't we? Because we're going to do something on histamine intolerance, which is something that we both had a lovely chat about before. But for now, Lucy Buxton, thank you so much for sharing your journey with PMDD. And honestly, I think it's just so brilliant that your daughter is in that happy place with clearly a mum that was prepared to go above and beyond to actually help her be right. So I wish you continued happiness, and to your daughter. So thanks for your time today.